I hope that's not true that everybody knows who I am. I'm sure the vast majority of people don't, and those of you who don't know who I am and what Evernote is, you are our growth opportunity. So it's very important that as many of you as possible. Otherwise, it'd be kind of pointless talking here.
Yes, I hope there's some questions people want to have answered here today. Let's start out, Phil, with how Evernote was born, where the idea come from. Did you have trouble remembering things before Evernote?
I did. In fact, my life is kind of split up into kind of two halves. There's the past few years, which I remember relatively crisply and in a lot of relevant detail, and then there's kind of everything before Evernote, which is sort of recedes into just a mush. Well, Evernote was started by, it was actually two teams that came together in 2007. There was this team of people that was led by this famous Russian-American entrepreneur, inventor named Stepan Pachikov. And he had a team that was been working on a human memory extension for years, going all the way back to the Apple Newton in the late 80s. And I had a team in Boston. We had just sold our second company in 2007, and we were looking to pretty much do the same thing. Stepan and I met in 2007 and decided to merge the two teams together. And so we created the modern version of Evernote and launched it in 2008.
An interesting innovation from last year, I guess, is the deal with Moleskine, where people actually write something in a notebook. That seems counterintuitive for a digital company using analog. How'd that come about, and how's it being received?
Well, yeah, really well. That notebook is it's really popular. I think it's their most popular notebook that they sell. They've got a few other kind of special brands that they work with, like Evernote. So they have the two that they did before us were these kind of two little-known consumer brands. It was Star Wars and Lego, and then they did the Evernote one after. So it was Star Wars, Lego, and then Evernote, and ours sold, I think, like 10 or 20 times more than any of the previous ones. So I'm happy to see that we outsell Star Wars, at least when it comes to paper notebooks. So it's been received really well, and the idea is we're not a technology company. You know, we're a design company. We really care about the experience, and so the experience of writing on a nice notebook with a pen is really beautiful. And for people who like that, there's no point trying to replace that with technology. So we wanted to preserve the best experience of writing on pen and paper, but then when you're done, you take a picture of it, so you have the best of both worlds, the best analog experience, the best digital experience together. And it's worked really well. It's very, very well received. We're going to do a bunch more of that kind of stuff later this year.
What are the most popular apps that have been built on top of Evernote?
Well, Evernote itself is definitely the biggest one. Probably 80% or so of our users just use the main Evernote app. And then the other apps we have are Evernote Food for remembering basically your whole food life, Hello for people that you meet, Sketch for visual communication. But the core one is still the main Evernote app.
Mm-hmm. Which of those do you use most besides the main Evernote one?
I use all of them. We pretty much only make products for me, so if I ever stopped using an app, it would be bad news for that app.
At last year's Evernote Trunk Conference, you said you wanted to grow the company to a billion users. How's that working out?
For a billion for a start, and it's a good start. We're nowhere near there yet. We've got a little bit more than 60 million, so it's a small start, but a good start nonetheless. We really think. We want Evernote to be your external brain. We want Evernote to make you smarter, make everyone smarter. And I think literally everyone in the world should be using it. So a billion is a good number to shoot for. That's not the limit, but it's a nice milestone.
Which do you think is going to come first, a billion users or an IPO?
IPO will come first. Probably.
Any projection on when that's going to happen?
Not for a while. I mean, we're trying to delay it. It's not true. We've always set out to build a 100-year startup. We've kind of said from the beginning, the goal of Evernote is to build a 100-year startup. So we want a company that's around in 100 years and that's still operating like a startup, that's still making fast decisions, that people still are in love with, that's innovative. And an IPO is, I think, a small part of that process. It's not the goal. We've never cared about the IPO as a goal. It's not an exit. It's just something it's a step that you have to take. And if you take that step wrong, you can trip on it. You can kind of hurt yourself. So it's important to do it right. So, 2-3 years, it's definitely trying to be very slow and methodical towards approaching it. And all of our IPO planning consists of really planning for what life is like after the IPO. We kind of want the day after to be as little as possible different from the day before. So that's kind of where the planning comes in.
You're one of a growing number of startups sporting billion-dollar valuations. Is this a sign of a new bubble, do you think?
I don't know. I think it's always hard to tell from the inside. I had a startup during the first bubble, and that was fun. And it felt very different than right now. It definitely felt like it was much more broad-based. It felt, there were tens of thousands of companies in, early 2000 that felt like they had no business models. They were trading at really, or not traded, but at least valued at really extensive valuations. And the public companies were really participating in that as well. It doesn't feel the same at all. It feels like there's not thousands of companies that are worth tons of money. There's a few dozen. And most of them are still private. In fact, the public markets haven't been particularly kind to technology companies in the past year. So it's hard to see, if there is a bubble, it's hard to see how you would actually define it, other than the general feeling that, there are a number of companies that are, by some number worth more than $1 billion. But that's private company valuations are kind of a meaningless figure. So we don't pay too much attention to it.
What are the pluses and minuses of hitting that number before IPO or some other kind of exit?
We're pretty neutral about it. I mean, we've never chased the valuation. It doesn't really factor into your life that much. It's not. I think people get confused between public company valuations and private company valuations. I think, a public company valuation means that there's a large number of buyers and a large number of sellers, and so the price is some kind of a fair reflection of sort of the middle ground between buyers and sellers, right? But a private company valuation is totally different. Like a private company valuation is, there's typically only one seller, the company itself, and the price isn't set by the average of the buyers, it's set by, the highest buyer. So like if you want your valuation to go up, all you have to do is find the craziest person that'll value you more. And so it's always easy to drive the valuation up, but then if you do that, the downside is, the downside of getting the craziest investor you can find is you wind up having a crazy person as your boss, on your board, and that's not great for making a 100-year company. So I think the value of a private company is really difficult to compare to the value of a public company. And so this whole talk about what's more than $1 billion, what's less, I don't really know what it means. It doesn't really mean much.
Mm-hmm. How important is foreign growth and revenue to Evernote?
Very. The US is less than a third of our users and similar in revenue, so about 70% is outside the country.
And where are you growing fastest outside the country?
Well, pretty much everywhere now. Japan was the first place that we really took off big. We just got really big in Japan, kind of surprisingly, a few years ago. And but now it's going pretty much everywhere. So I think China is the fastest growing. I think actually Brazil may be growing. China and Brazil are basically in first and second place, is really quickly growing. But Korea is doing great. Parts of Europe are doing really well. Latin America in general is doing really well. So it's kind of global.
With all the notes that people are taking, sharing on Evernote, has the government ever asked you to share any of that?
No, in fact, I got a call from a reporter on Friday. I got a call from one of the major national outlets, and the producer said, "Oh, hey, so what do you know about this Prism thing?" I said, "I had never heard of it. I don't know anything about it." So, so the government never approached you for this? I said, "No." And she said, "Oh, well, I kind of figured you guys are a big enough company. I thought they would have approached you." And I was like, "Yeah, that's it. We're not an important enough company. That's why." No, this is complete crazy talk. I have no idea what they're talking about. I completely believe, Google and Apple and all the other companies who are also saying we have no idea what this is. I've never heard of it before until Friday. We certainly are not and have never, given any sort of blank access to any of our data to anyone or any government. When we get law enforcement, court orders and stuff like that, we have to pay attention to that, but we have a very long process for dealing with that, and it's kind of one user at a time, and it takes a very long time. But no, there's never been anything like what's been reported, and I honestly don't know where it's coming from. And
do you have any viewpoint on the controversy about whether this should be done or not?
I don't know. I think there's probably way more surveillance than is actually useful. It's hard for me to imagine what people are actually looking for in these mountains and mountains of data. So I think, everything you put into Evernote is private. It should be private. You should be the only person who sees it. Like we don't look at that data. We don't data mine it. We don't use your data to drive advertising. We don't sell it to partners. We don't do anything to affiliate. We're huge believers in privacy. There's always national security and other implications that you have to balance out, but we come very solidly down on the side of privacy.
Talk a little bit more about that decision not to use what's in the notes to drive revenue.
Well, basically, at the beginning of Evernote, we decided that we were only going to build things for us. Like we said, Evernote's my third company, and the first two startups, we were building products for other people. The first one we did stuff for like e-commerce sites. The second one, we actually built a lot of software for government, for security agencies. And both of those were fine. I mean, they were good startups to have, but we always had to ask our question, like, what does the market want? What do the users want? And the whole point of Evernote is we got tired of that. We said, we only want to build things for us. So we want to say, what do we want? And anything that we don't want, we will not build. And I don't want a system that analyzes my data and uses it to, target advertising and to affiliates. Like, that is not something personally that I'm interested in using, and therefore it's not something that I'm personally interested in building.
As you say, you've had 3 startups now. Can you tell me something that you learned from each one of them that you took to the next one?
Yeah, there's a lot of lessons learned. I guess the first one we started in '97, and it was me and a couple of college college friends of mine. We were all working as programmers. We were all engineers, and we were in this pretty big sized company in Boston. It's called the Art Technology Group, one of the big companies around the first internet time. And we didn't know anything about running a business. We didn't know anything about having our own company. We just had this question that we wanted to try out. We thought, what if the 3 of us started our own company and we didn't hire any assholes into it? Like, that was the big experiment, because we kind of sat around, and you do this all the time, right? Like, you'll be sitting at your office, and you'll kind of go, okay, like, I understand myself, like I understand why I'm here, and I understand what I do, and I'm reasonably good at my job, okay. And like I see that person over there, I'm like, yeah, okay, that person's pretty good. I get why she's here, and that person over there is pretty good. I get why he's here, but then like, I don't want to look at anyone in particular, but that guy's an asshole. Why is he here? Like, when he interviewed, didn't they know? Why did they make him a job offer? So that was it. We just thought, can we make a company? And when we interview people for work, if we decide they're assholes, we just won't hire them. And we thought, that's never been done before in the history of the universe. Let's try it. And so that was the entirety of our first company. But it worked great. But we didn't have a product. We were consulting. We were just programmers. We were just basically coding for money. And the big lesson from there was consulting is like the worst existence in the universe. It's awful because you can make a lot of money, but only while you're working. Like the day you stop is the day that the money stops. You're not making any value. You're just, it's just wage labor. So the second company, we said, okay, we learned our lesson there, so we're not going to do consulting. We're going to do a product, because it's the only way you can make repeated value is to actually build a product. But it was a product for somebody else. It was a product for banks and for governments. And so then the lesson we learned from that is, okay, making a product is better than consulting, but if you don't make a product for yourself, it's not actually that great. So the third lesson that we finally applied to Evernote is, let's make a product, but let's only make it for ourselves. And man, that's the secret. That's the secret of happiness. It's like only working on stuff for yourself.
And what's the lesson that you've learned since starting Evernote that you're now applying?
Oh, we're relaxing the no assholes rule quite a bit. I think that's the...
You're letting some in?
Yeah, well, I'm grandfathered in, and we've generally been laxer with that rule now.
The year you started Evernote back in 2008 wasn't the easiest time to raise money. How hard was that, and how would you compare it to your last fundraising?
It was very tough, and Evernote, so there was already a company called Evernote that Stepan had founded going back to, I think, like 1874 or something. Like it had been around for a while, and it already had a few investors or angel investors in it, so there was already money there. And then when we joined, when we merged the two teams together, we recapitalized it. So we put more money in ourselves. I put some money in, Stepan put some money in. We had more money from kind of friends and family. And then we kind of rebuilt the structure of the company, and we were out raising money again in 2008, which was absolutely the worst time period. And it was terrible. I mean, we got basically no one in Silicon Valley would give us any money. All of our initial investment wound up coming from Russia, from Japan, from Canada. So it was all kind of unconventional sources. And all the initial investment came from users, like people who just loved the really early product that also happened to be investors. And we came within minutes of having to close the company down, of like running out of money, and we just saved at the last minute by somebody putting in a little bit of cash. And that went on until about 2009, and then starting in about, I guess, end of 2009, we finally had enough traction where we could demonstrate the business model, and then it became much easier, and raising money has been much easier since then.
And how about the last fundraise? I mean,
the last few have been relatively straightforward. Now we can pick the investors that we want, and we've done a combination of primary and secondary rounds in all the past rounds, which means some of the earlier investors and employees and founders get to sell some shares. So we kind of try to decouple liquidity from exit. We don't want, this is part of the IPO planning. We don't want the IPO to be an exit. We want it to be just another day. So we want plenty of people to be able to sell stock kind of all the way up, leading up to it. So we've done that, and it's been great. We've been really fortunate to have some of the best late-stage investors in the world with us. So our first Silicon Valley VC round was done by Morgan Thaler, which was fantastic. They were the first Silicon Valley people who actually took us seriously. That was our B round, and then Sequoia came in with a large C and D round, and then we've kind of done things after that with Meritech, with T. Rowe Price, with a few of the other really late-stage people.
So now that you have more control, more choice, what are you looking for when you look at an investor?
I think just a common vision. We want someone who also wants to make a 100-year company and who wants to help us do it, who has a kind of a no tricks philosophy. We really don't like. There's a lot of people who are focused on various hacks, various tricks to kind of optimize short-term gain. You talk to Silicon Valley companies all over here. They have growth teams where they're teams of people focused on, well, what kind of little tweaks can we make to get more users a little bit faster or more revenue. Or we kind of have a no tricks mentality. We have very little tolerance for gimmicks, and so luckily there's plenty of really high value investors who kind of think the same way, and we're always happy to be involved with them.
I read somewhere that you taught yourself how to program. What inspired you to do that? Did you?
A lack of good software, I guess, and a complete lack of any sort of athletic competence. I think that was probably the biggest contribution to my programming career. I still am. I'm a dedicated indoorsman. I just really, I never got along well with the outdoors, with sports, with any of the traditional things that kids like to do. So I was a nerd. I sat at home and I programmed.
How do you make the transition from programmer to CEO?
I was the weakest programmer of the three people that started Engine 5, my first company. So we were all programmers, but I was the weakest one. And so, I kind of got bumped up into management because they all had better things to do. So it was easiest to waste my time because I wasn't as productive as a coder. So I started going to meetings and negotiating contracts. And that's kind of still the way it is.
So how's the learning curve, learning software versus learning CEO?
It's I don't know that I'm particularly great at either of them. At some sense, I think my core competency is, I think the thing that I'm good at is I'm good at understanding what I want, and I'm good at explaining that. Like I can persistently and succinctly tell you exactly what I want you to do. And I think it's kind of the same skill, actually, between being a designer and being a programmer, being a CEO. It's just kind of just being able to articulate what you actually want to have accomplished. And then the other big part of it is I'm really good at combining other people's good ideas. Like I'm actually not. I don't think I'm particularly innovative or visionary myself. I'm surrounded by really visionary people, and but I am pretty good at kind of hearing three random ideas 6 months apart and then having a spark and kind of combining them together into an actionable product. And I think that's also a skill that's very useful both in product design and in, being a CEO.
Has that become more challenging as you've grown globally? You have offices around the world to get that communication?
Yeah, I mean, if I decided if I'm ever going to write a book about Evernote, which I never will because I'd have to know how to write first. But if I was ever going to write a book, I decided I would call it "Good Problems to Have," because when we were getting started, we would sit around. And I remember we would talk about a bunch of stuff, and a lot of times we would say, "Oh, like what's going to happen when?" What's going to happen when we're adding users so fast that we're going to have to get a new data center? And we would say, oh, that'll be a good problem to have. Or like, what's going to happen when, we have so many users that our indexing system won't work, and we have to kind of re-index the whole architecture. Oh, that'll be a good problem to have. And it turns out that like all of these things that are good problems to have, like we're having all of them. And a good problem to have, turns out good problems to have suck just as bad as bad problems to have. Like they're just as much work. In fact, they're probably worse because you sort of have something to lose now. And so like all of these things where we used to sit around going like, oh boy, we'll be so happy when we're wrestling with these problems. Well, now we're wrestling with them and they're actually not that happy. They're actually kind of big problems. So I think that's been kind of my key insight so far at Evernote is as we get bigger, everything becomes higher stakes, everything becomes more stressful. And I kind of look back 3-4 years ago now as sort of like the happy, magical golden times when we really couldn't screw anything up because we didn't have anything. Now we're sort of constantly having to worry about, screwing something up as well as moving forward.
Do you expect to stay CEO long term?
Well, it depends what you mean by long term. So I can't be the last CEO of Evernote by definition. If I'm the last CEO of Evernote, then I have failed at my job. Right? The only way that I'm the last CEO of Evernote is that we did not make it to be a 100-year company. And that's an important part of the discipline. So like I realize that finding the next CEO is a core part of my job. It is not going to be me. It can't be me forever. Kind of by definition, the company's not about me. So this is one of the many things that we have to do, that we have to think about differently when we're serious about making a 100-year startup. One of them is, look, in 100 years from now, I'm probably not going to be the CEO anymore. I mean, I still hope to be involved with the company in some way at that time, but I may not be the full-time CEO, and I will have to find someone probably well before that. But is that something that happens, in 6 months from now or in 20 years from now? I have no idea. I do see Evernote as my life's work, so I want to stay involved as long as absolutely possible. But at some point, a very important part of my job is finding the man or woman who can be a much better CEO than I can, and then making sure they're the next CEO.
So what's the next hurdle to cross as far as Evernote's progress towards that 100-year company?
Man, it's all hurdles. The next hurdle, the immediate next one is I just came from WWDC this morning, and this happens every year. So every year, basically, we have all these roadmaps, and then we go see what Apple announces, and then we just have to throw away all of our roadmaps and redo them. And so, if any of you guys paid attention to what they announced this morning, it's the biggest change in iOS ever, and it's literally like 2 hours ago. I sat there and I looking on stage, and I realized, okay, this is a total do-over for us. We're just gonna have to go back to the office, and we have to start doing everything from scratch, so that we can be ready for iOS 7 when it ships. So which is great. Like it's terrifying, but it's also great. Like that's why we're in this industry.
So what do you like about what was announced, and what do you think is worrisome?
I thought it was great. I don't know, did anyone, have you guys been here all morning, or did anyone see? They basically, there's a bunch of stuff, but really it's just a fundamental change in iOS. Just the look is totally different. It looks nothing like the current one does. It's a completely different look, but it's not just skin deep. It really kind of goes into the core, interaction principles of how you interact with the device. And Evernote is all about getting to every part of your phone, and so all those interactions just changed out from under us, and we have to go back to the drawing board and redo all of them, which is tremendously fun.
You sound like you mean that.
I do. I don't have to do the work.
I read recently that you have a digital acoustic grand piano and are teaching yourself music theory and learning to play. Why are you doing that at this stage when you have to rewrite everything to do with iOS?
It's true. I may have to pause the music lessons for a couple of months. I grew up with, so both my parents are musicians. Both my parents were classical musicians in Russia. My father is a violinist, my mother's a pianist. They both, played in the orchestras. And they gave up trying to teach me when I was 4. So basically, by the time I was 4 years old, they realized, not worth it. But teaching kids piano lessons in Russia, it's different than here. There's no such thing as you don't give a child piano lessons in Russia for their self-esteem. You do it if there's a chance that they can grow up to be a world-class professional pianist. And I guess by 4, you can kind of tell. And so by 4, my parents kind of said, yeah, he's never going to play professionally. Why waste more time? And then, that was it. But I always had pianos kind of around me when I was growing up, because when we moved to the United States, my parents gave lessons, and I kind of always had all of this music, but I had no musical talent, just a lot of being surrounded by it all the time. And I have always wanted to see what can I understand myself. I know I'm never going to be able to play, but if I could learn a little bit about the theory, about what actually makes something musical, I thought it could be helpful in a lot of other ways. So I've been doing that for the past few months, and it's really phenomenal. It's phenomenal how much it stretches your brain. You can literally feel your brain, getting bigger when you do it. Plus, this is a piano, with a full robot in it, which is the world isn't going to make an acoustic grand piano with a robot in it, and then have me not buy it. That's not how the world works. Yeah.
So is there a piece of music or a particular musician that you're aspiring to?
I sit there obsessively playing the sad piano music from the closing credits of the Incredible Hulk TV show from the 80s, over and over and over again. I don't know why. My wife's really sick of it now.
How about personal inspiration? Was there somebody from early in your life that inspired you to become what you are today?
Well, many people. I've always had lots of people that I looked up to. A sort of childhood hero of mine was Houdini. So I really kind of read all about Houdini, and actually I studied magic and escapology for a while, so I can get out of all sorts of handcuffs and stuff like that. Not super useful, but that was fun. And I really kind of focused on Houdini for a while. I don't know why, I was obsessed with him. And then later in life, when I got to high school and college, there was a lot of kind of more contemporary researchers and scientists that were sort of deeply inspirational. So Gordon Bell, who was a researcher at Microsoft, Danny Hillis, and Stuart Brand, who are currently running something called the Long Now Foundation, which is an organization dedicated to long-term thinking. By long-term, they mean 10,000 years. So they're sort of planning things for 10,000 years. Ray Kurzweil at the Singularity Institute. So there's a whole bunch of people, a generation older than me, that I think are just doing fantastic work. That I've been. The best part about moving to Silicon Valley is I've gotten to meet all these people that I kind of grew up idolizing, and it turns out they're just they're right here. They're all real people you can go and have coffee with.
Was there a piece of advice that you got early on that stuck with you? Yeah. There was definitely a lot of really influential advice about just how to look at the world, scientifically. And I can't remember any particular quote that kind of sticks in my head, but I think the sum total of these things is this idea that everything in life can be improved. Everything in the world can be made better, and everything in the world therefore should be made better. It deserves to be made better. It's a moral obligation to try to improve things a little bit at a time. And that was, I think a very large number of people from, Einstein to Steve Jobs, have said things kind of along those veins. And I remember really deeply internalizing that idea. I understand that you have video walls at Evernote offices that allow people to be in touch with everywhere else that there's an Evernote office. Does that ever get confusing?
No. I think at this point, people just kind of started ignoring them. They're just sort of like, now it's just kind of ambient. Like, so the main idea was, we would have like a window. So there'd be a wall, like in a hallway, and there'd just be a window. But on the other side of the window would be, Tokyo or, Austin or whatever. And so you could just go and just, these aren't for video conferencing, like you're not for meetings. Just, if you're like going to get coffee, you see someone getting coffee, 6,000 miles away at the same time, and you can kind of wave at each other and that kind of stuff. And it works, it works reasonably well. I mean, obviously with time zone differences, there's parts of the world that are just empty most of the time when I'm getting coffee. But we're starting to experiment with kind of time sequencing things so that like, we haven't done this yet, but we're about to. What I'd like to try is, if it's 9 a.m. here and I'm getting coffee at the coffee machine, I just want there to be a big window right next to it. And on the other side, it's 9 a.m. in Tokyo with somebody getting coffee there. And it's not real time, but you still kind of get the feeling of who else is in the office and kind of what they're wearing and who's sleepy and who's happy and all that kind of stuff. It's just, I think it's all ways to try to keep that culture, to make it feel like a startup, to make it a startup even as the company gets physically bigger.
Mm-hmm. There have been a lot of those workplace innovations. I mean, you were one of the first ones with the Anybot, right? To use that. I mean, what's been the experience with that? Do you still use it?
We do, although much less now because we moved into a 5-story building, and it's not good with stairs, and it's not cool enough where I want to buy 5 of them, 1 for each story, and so it was pretty great when we were all on the same floor, but now we're on 5 floors. We really don't use it. So I sent it to our Texas office because that's still on 1 floor, and so now I use it when I want to kind of talk to the people in Austin.
What have been the most successful and the least successful of those workplace innovations? Can you give me a couple of examples?
Well, a lot of the stuff we did with video, really it takes more work to make it feel good than you would originally think. It's easy to put cameras and monitors everywhere, but you just don't get that magical experience unless you're really careful with, how you have sound set up, what the angles are. It's much harder in reality than in practice. So I would say I'm not overwhelmed with our success of any of the video stuff. The best thing we probably did is we decided to have an all hands meeting every week. So every single week we have a 20-minute meeting, the entire company. We all kind of stand around a staircase here in headquarters in Redwood City, and then everyone else participates remotely. And it's just a 20-minute stand-up where we just, I talk about what's new that week. I kind of have a topic. Sometimes we'll have somebody come in and do a little guest, chat. And so it's a very old-fashioned thing. It's just the idea that every single person in the company stands together for 20 minutes once a week, and that's been fantastic. That's probably the most effective thing that we've done in terms of helping us scale and still preserve that culture. But there's been a bunch of stuff. We've really experimented with benefits quite a lot. So we have all sorts of benefits for employees that are really just designed to eliminate obstacles to people being productive.
How difficult is it to keep the startup drive in a large company?
It's tough. Well, I think when you're small, so there's plenty of tiny companies that aren't startups, right? There's a lot of 5-person companies that are the worst places in the universe to work. They're not entrepreneurial, they're not startups, and there's lots of big companies with thousands of employees that are still very much, I think, feel like they're making great startup quality things. So I don't think it's necessarily to have to do with size, but I think when you're small, you get a lot of good things for free. When you're 20 people and you're all sitting in one room, you're getting a lot of stuff automatically for free just because you're kind of in close proximity. And as you get bigger, a lot of those things don't come for free anymore. You have to explicitly work towards making them happen. The fact that when you're 20 people, everyone knows what everyone else is working on, and that's super important, but you don't have to think about it. It just kind of happens. When you're 300 people, unless you're very, very methodical, people have no idea what other people are working on. And when you don't know what your coworkers are working on, that's when you kind of start to lose respect for your coworkers, and you kind of start to get cliques and different groups. So you just have to intentionally say that we have to pay for things that we used to get free when we were smaller. But I think as long as you keep doing that, I think it's possible to maintain the culture indefinitely.
That awareness of what other parts of the business are working on is something that you've brought into part of the culture, right? Moving people around for a meeting.
Yeah. We try to, we experiment with seating arrangements. We experiment with how we schedule meetings. We experiment with the company as much as we experiment with the product. It's like, we will spend as much time thinking about our lunch, like changing our lunch program, as we do changing about like some screens in our main app. It's kind of the same thing. In fact, the same people do it. There was so we moved into a new headquarters here in Redwood City. We got this beautiful 5-story building right off 101. If you drive by it now, you'll see the really nice Evernote sign. And that sign is great. And when we moved in, we wanted to design our own sign. We said, oh, we finally have this great placement, like let's make our own logo, let's make our own sign. So we didn't just go to like a sign company and said, make us a sign. Like we really, like our designers did it. And it's beautiful, like it's very well made, it's really nice. The problem is like our designers turned out they were great at making a really beautiful building sign, but they didn't know anything about building signs. And so when we finally had it made, it was like 8 times heavier than the building could support. And we had to get all sorts of new structural bracing in our building. Like we had to like reinforce the roof of our 5-story building so that we can put the sign up. And we had to get like special permits from the city. It took 9 months longer than it was supposed to. So it took us like 9 months extra to get that sign up. But but it looks great, and it was kind of worth it. And when it finally came up, I tweeted like, hey, the new Evernote sign is finally going up. And I got a lot of tweets back, and they were all really positive, congratulations, like looks great. But like one guy, there's always somebody who hates you. So one guy tweeted like, I can't believe you're wasting time in the building sign instead of fixing bugs in your Mac version. And I remember my first reaction was I was going to reply. I was going to be like, look, it's not really the same people who are putting up the sign that are fixing bugs. And then I realized, wait, no, it is the same people. Like, yeah, no, you got us. We totally, actually, they are exactly the same people. So that's kind of the philosophy, like we do everything ourselves. So Evernote employees are now like the world's experts about building signs. And hopefully we'll never put another one up again, but like we now have that experience. And doing that was a fundamentally important part of the culture. Like we say, like it is our design, it's our expertise, like we're stretching our design muscles to know about SOX and building signs and software, and it's all the same people doing it. And that is probably the most important part of keeping the culture going, like feeling like, yeah, anything, like you can do anything as long as you insist on being excellent about it.
You want to take some questions from the...
Let's do it.
Can we take some questions from the crowd here? Does anybody have a question for Phil? One over here.
Hey, question about the direct secondaries that you've done. This is still early days, so like a new motto in Silicon Valley is stay private longer, and you want to get some liquidity decoupled from the definitive liquidity event for the company. Maybe tell us a bit about what you've learned about doing that, maybe how many transactions have you done, and what might you do differently?
Yeah, I think we got pretty lucky on that. So we were able to control all of the secondaries pretty well. So we never went through this period of having kind of like second market and sort of other uncontrolled secondaries where employees were selling directly. That could be pretty disruptive, but we were able to button that down pretty carefully. Like we were just paying attention to what was going on with Facebook and a few other companies. So we got all that under control. And I think we've done 2 or 3 rounds that have had primary and secondary components. I think it's great. I mean, I think that it is a profoundly stupid idea that liquidity should be tied to exit. Like that just doesn't make any sense. It never made any sense. I don't know why it took the world so long to say this is unhealthy, right? It is deeply unhealthy to have early investors, angel investors, founders, and employees sitting in a company feeling like we have to sell this company or we have to go public now or else we don't make any money. Like that doesn't benefit anyone. That sets all the wrong incentives. It creates way too much stress. And so saying to people, hey, you can sell 5, 10, 20, whatever percent kind of per round all the way through is fantastic. Like it's all upside. It's good for morale. It reduces pressure. It aligns incentives. It lets you rotate out short time horizon early investors for much longer time horizon late stage investors. It's just great. I was a little bit worried initially about like, well, if we let employees sell a portion of their shares, what does that do to employee motivation? And it increases it, right? Because like if you sell 10% of your shares and you make some cash, like you're happy that you made some cash and you can like you can do something nice for your family, but B, you immediately see what the other 90% is worth. So it's been a highly positive experience for us so far.
More questions?
Please.
Your company is one of the inventors, one of the pioneers of freemium model. Can you please share some statistics on conversion rates and more fundamental things like why people pay? As I understand, there is no pressure to pay. You could stay with free version forever, but some people nevertheless pay. Did you interview them? Do they know why they do it? And also some numbers on how it happens.
Sure. So I don't actually think there's anything magical about freemium. Like I never really thought of our business model I never thought of freemium as the most important part of our business model. I think the most important part of our business model is direct. So the bright lines are all the money we make has to be direct. And freemium is a part of it, but not everything we do is freemium. We have plenty of stuff that you just pay money for. There's no free version. Like Evernote Business, that's just paid. We have, the Moleskine and other partnerships. You just buy those. So the big distinction for me is direct versus indirect, and we reject all indirect sources of revenue. So we don't make money from advertising. We don't do affiliate marketing. We don't do data mining. We don't monetize your data in any way. The big reason for us to do that, even though that's a significant amount of revenue that we're giving up, is that's what aligns the long-term interests between us and the customers. Like it's very difficult to make something good. It's even harder if you're trying to please sort of two masters. If you're trying to make a product that users love, but at the same time you're trying to please someone who's kind of orthogonal to the user interest, like the advertiser or something like that. So I think the central Evernote thing is we only make money from our end users when they want to pay us for a great experience. We don't make money in any other way. Within that, freemium is how we started, and that's still probably 80% of our revenue, although as a percentage, other streams are growing really quickly, like Evernote Business. And the freemium model works great, basically. As you said, there's a free version. Free version is great. The free version is the main version. Like it's not a loss leader, it's not a teaser, it's not a bait and switch. And the purpose of the free version is not to get you to pay. The purpose of the free version is to get you to stay. Like we want you to fall in love with Evernote. And the bet that we made was that if you have a product that's inexpensive enough, like I think there's basically two types of prices. There's like two types of products. There's expensive products and there's inexpensive products. And to me, the difference is something is expensive if for the target user, they have to decide if they're going to buy your product, they have to not get something else. So like the new MacBook Airs, which Apple just announced today, are expensive because for most people that are in the target audience, if you're going to decide to buy one of those, you probably gave something else up, right? You probably are like, well, okay, I'm going to buy this new MacBook Air, and I'm not going to buy this new TV this year, or something like that, right? Whereas inexpensive means that for the target audience, you've never made a trade-off. So Evernote is inexpensive. It's $5 a month for Evernote Premium because for most of our target audience, like it's not, oh, I'm going to spend $5 for Evernote. I better not go to Starbucks, today. It's like it's cheap enough where it doesn't matter. And so I think when you have a product that is inexpensive, you don't have to make a compelling, rational case for why someone should buy it. You really have to just make a kind of an emotional case. People, you buy it because you love it. So the longer you use Evernote, the higher the perceived value is because you've got your life in there. The higher the perceived value, the more you're likely to just want to pay for it. Because what we found is, people love to buy things. They just hate feeling like they're being sold to. So the no pressure approach, the just slow buildup of perceived value, the frictionless way to actually purchase something, like those are the core. That's the core strategy behind it. So when most people buy Evernote Premium, they don't give a specific reason for why they did it. We ask people, and some people give reasons, but the biggest reason is always because I love Evernote. In terms of the stats, the conversion rate varies with cohort age, so with the time that you spend using Evernote. So think of it this way. We want Evernote to feel more valuable to you the longer you use it. So let's say I'm an Evernote user and I just started using it 2 days ago. And let's say you came to me 2 days after I started using Evernote and you said, Phil, how much money do I have to give you? I'll give you money right now and you have to permanently destroy everything in your Evernote account up to now. How much money would it cost? Well, let's say I've been using it for 2 days. I'd be like, I don't know, there's barely anything in there. And give me $20 and we're even. But now let's say you come to me 3 weeks later. And you say, like, how much money would it cost me to permanently delete everything in your Evernote account after 3 months? I'd say, man, 3 months. I got like really important meeting notes in there. I've got some good like recipes that I clipped. I have some nice photos and memories. I've got a business presentation I worked on. Like, that's 3 months of my life. That's pretty expensive. Like, man, I don't know, at least, I don't know, a few $1,000, right? How about give me a new MacBook Air and I'll let you delete 3 months of my Evernote account. But now you come to me after like, now I've been using Evernote for 5 years, which I actually have. I would kill you. There's no money you can give me to delete 5 years of my life. It's worth more than my house. It's worth more than my car. It's the most important thing I own by far. By far, there is nothing that I own, right, that's actually property of mine that's more valuable to me than my Evernote account right now. Nothing. And it's just because I used it for longer. I've got my whole life in there. So the more valuable it is, if it's cheap, the more likely people are to pay for it. And so the conversion rate linearly follows how long you've been using it. So in the first month, it's very low. In the first month, it's like less than half of 1% of people pay. And after a year, though, it's like 5%, or 5 or 6%. And our oldest users, the ones that have been with us for about 5 years, about 25% of them are paying. So the longer you use it, the more valuable it is, the more likely you are to pay for it. And so those cohort conversion numbers just go up linearly. But on top of that, we also have Evernote Business, we have partner products, we have all of this other stuff. We're perfectly happy to sell you stuff. I actually think Freemium is going to be probably 50% or less of our total revenue in 5 years. But the rest of it will all be direct. What we won't do is have indirect revenue where we're kind of monetizing your information in some way.
More questions?
Hello, Igor Cherny, representing Sears, another 100-year-old retailer and a company. I'm definitely very intrigued with the notion of being a 100-year-old company. And when you drive on 101, you see the sign that says the first person that will live to 150 years is born now. I think you have a chance, definitely, to still be with that company.
True.
At that time. My question is a little different. You mentioned that when you were with ATG, you were thinking, well, how do I start that company? How do I become that CEO who knows a lot more than others? And you were pretty much booted out of your other programmer guys, friends, and you started to go and figure out what contracts to sign and so on. How do you know? Who taught you? Who were your people? Who were your basically life teachers who helped you along the way? Because that's typically what people are fighting with when they're only starting as entrepreneurs.
Yeah, it's interesting. I never thought of myself as, I never thought of myself as an entrepreneur. I was never motivated by the idea of starting a company. I never really cared about that. I still kind of don't. I certainly never thought of myself as a CEO or as a business person. To me, like, that part of my life always felt like it was because I was failing at more interesting things. Like, had I been a better programmer, I would have just been that. And it was basically like I was there with a bunch of friends of mine, and we had this experiment going. We wanted to work for ourselves, and they all had better things to do. And I was my time was the least valuable because I was a pretty good engineer, but they were exceptionally good. And so, I just started doing more stuff. It was like, to me, like, being a CEO was exactly the same as, going to Dunkin' Donuts and getting them coffee. Like, it was just like, what can I do to be helpful? And, what I could do to be helpful was, sometimes I would order Chinese food, and sometimes I would find the next office space, and sometimes I would go and negotiate for the next contract. And And that's just kind of how it started. Like it was really like, it was CEO, by being the janitor first and just kind of taking care of all this stuff. And that's still kind of how I see myself. Like I see my primary job is to basically make sure that there are absolutely brilliant people at Evernote and, make sure they have enough coffee to sort of stay productive. And I don't know that there's really much more to it than that. So, who were my janitorial heroes growing up? I'm not sure, but I never, I didn't start, I wasn't reading a lot of business books. I wasn't having deep thoughts about strategy. Like this really isn't the approach that I took. And it wasn't until much later in life where I actually started taking being a CEO even remotely seriously. Like it's really just been the past couple of years that I've thought about that I've been interacting with real CEOs. That I've started kind of taking this seriously and reading about it and trying to be better because of course it is a job, it is a skill just like anything else. And so now I've been really fortunate. I've been fortunate to know, some great CEOs, basically all of the ones in Silicon Valley that have been great mentors to me. But this is much more recent. Like Mark Benioff from Salesforce has been a fantastic mentor, and Hiroshi Mikitani from Rakuten has been great. And I had a lunch, I had like an hour and a half lunch with Steve Ballmer 2 years ago. That was maybe the most useful kind of how to be a CEO conversation that I've ever had with anyone. But that's all, that's all fairly recent stuff. In fact, I guess this is pretty common, but I've been talking to several other Silicon Valley founders and CEOs, even some pretty well-known ones, and I started realizing this is a thing that a lot of us have in common. And I said, I still kind of feel like a fraud. Like every day, I'm still a little bit afraid that at some point, like the adults are going to show up and be like, hey, what the hell are you doing? What are you doing in this building with all these people? And I would have to be like, the gig is up, everyone go home. I still feel in the back of my head that like that's gonna happen. Like it's sooner or later, someone is gonna show up and be like, hey, you stop pretending to be a CEO. And maybe it still will, who knows? But so far we've gotten by, it's been okay.
Hi, my name is Vlad Kuznetsov, and my question is, you have a technical background and you're running now a bigger and bigger company and solving all these business problems. You just mentioned the value of customer data in the cloud, right? That could be most valuable possession that this person has. So how much of, what are the biggest headaches that you have in terms of keeping that data safe, always available, safe from all sorts of evildoers, perpetrators, and is it only your problem or it's already somebody else, like CTO problem? So
well,
just availability, security data, and like all these problems.
Yeah, I mean, that stuff is very hard, and it's very expensive, and we spend a lot of time and a lot of money on it, and it's kind of thankless. But the availability and the privacy and the security of your data is just something that, there's no silver bullet, there's no like magic solution. It's just something that, every day we have to work on it. Everything is my problem. So there is nothing that's serious in the company that I ever feel isn't my problem. So, we have a absolutely brilliant CTO, and we have really great security people, but it's all still my problem. I still worry about all that stuff every day. But this is one of these things we were talking about. This is one of those good problems to have, where, when you're starting out and you kind of think like, man, what's going to happen when we're well enough known? Like this is a classic one. 5 years ago, we'd sit around thinking like, oh, what's going to happen when like our brand is well enough known where we become a target for hackers? Oh boy, that'll be a good problem to have. Yeah, well, it's a good problem to have, but it's extremely painful and expensive and still a huge problem. So yeah, it's just one of 100 things that keep me up at night.
What's the biggest one out of those?
Well, privacy is easy because that's just up to us. Like, That's just our policy. Like you have full privacy with what Evernote does because our policy is that we'd never do anything to violate it. So that's straightforward. Like we don't have to worry about that. Security and availability are both important. All of those things. The security, the disaster recovery and availability is a little bit easier to plan for. We have pretty detailed plans for that. We kind of know what happens in the event of various different scales of catastrophes and all that stuff. So, and in fact, it's kind of fun to plan for that because you sort of get to you get to plan out zombie apocalypse and how do we make sure the data is still there, and that's actually kind of fun. I mean, it's not fun when it's happening, but you can at least enjoy planning for it. The security stuff is just a giant pain in the ass. It's just a never-ending, just every day you're just tightening the bolts a little bit and you're reading on what's going on, and that's the one that there's basically no upside. Like there's nothing fun about it. You just do it, and it's a non-glamorous part of running any kind of, I think, non-trivial data company at this point.
I think we might have time for one more question.
Can I? So what would be your advice to young entrepreneurs?
Probably not to be an entrepreneur, I guess. If I didn't know anything else about them, if all I knew is they were young, I think most people want to be entrepreneurs for the wrong reasons. And so I would ask what the reasons are. And if the reasons are because you think that being an entrepreneur is a good way to make money, then I think then you're just bad at math. Like it's just not, right? Like your expected return, if you care about your lifetime earnings, like being an entrepreneur is the worst thing. Well, not the worst thing, but it's pretty bad. Chances are you're just going to work for 10 years on something and walk away with nothing, no money. And I think if you care about your lifetime earnings potential and you're kind of smart enough to be an entrepreneur, you really shouldn't do it. You should be an engineer or a lawyer or a banker or a consultant or something. You make much more money over the 30 or 40 years of your career than being an entrepreneur. But if you have an idea for how to make the world a little bit different, how to bend the universe a bit in a direction that you want it to bend to, then now is the best time to do it. And so I guess my first advice is don't do it. And my second advice, well, if you insist, only build what you want. Like ignore all of the conventional wisdom about finding market fit and kind of doing market analysis and figuring out what the market wants. Like especially if it's your first time, it doesn't matter what the market wants. It only matters what you want. So just build something for yourself. That'll, at least your first time around, they'll give you your greatest chance of succeeding is if you actually make something for yourself. And that's what I wish I would have, if I had a time machine, and if I had a time machine, I can go back in time and I can give advice to a younger, skinnier version of myself 20 years ago. I'd go back in time and I'd say, dude, well, first of all, I'd say, don't worry about anything because in 20 years, you're gonna have a time machine. So it doesn't matter. But then I would say, make Evernote your first company, not your third. Make the one that you built for yourself the first one, not the third one. I think that would be the best advice I can give myself.
Well, thank you very much. Thanks for the great question.
Thank you so much.